right, got the clutch pedal pretty much put back together. Now it's time to give it a test run here, but before we do that, I just filled up the transfer case. It's two really large fill and drain bolts, so I'm just using an adjustable crescent. And then I used a fluid transfer pump, the exact one you see right here. It's about 10 bucks from O'Reilly. Probably Harbor Freight has them too. That's what I used. I pumped in, it was over 4 quarts. I really did 5 full quarts before it started draining out of the output shaft, which kind of pissed me off because, yeah, I probably have a leak in the seal there at this point. So, and we basically just lost all that extra quart that I put in there is now sitting in my bucket. So if I didn't have a leak there, I'd probably have closer to 4 quarts total. But the sucky part is it didn't start leaking until I pumped all 5 quarts in, and then it started coming out of the fill bolt and the output shaft at the same time. So, whatever. We are going to put the drive shaft back in, and then we'll do the front drive shaft, and I'll show you the clearances that I've got between the mat or the external slave that I have going on and the drive shaft. So we'll see how that all lines up. Oh, we also, actually, before we do that, we need to check the transmission. And the guy I bought it from said he didn't drain the fluid. I'm gonna pull out that bolt. It's a it's really weird, like 17 millimeter Allen. Let me go get it, show you. So I had to, of course, go to Harbor Freight for this to grab one of these guys, but it's a 17 millimeter, it's not gonna focus, but it's an Allen wrench, basically an Allen key. And I'm going to use that to check the fill plug on my transmission just to make sure. Now that guy, being that it is a NV3500, it doesn't take gear oil, it takes a synchro mesh from what I understand online. I'm just gonna use like a Pennzoil synchro mesh. I think there's a couple other brands and you can go with the dealer specific stuff, but I'm not gonna mess with any of that. I'm just gonna stick with the Pennzoil stuff. But I'm not doing any of that until I verify that it works, but I do wanna make sure there actually is fluid in there before I try to drive it around and destroy the thing. So if there's any kind of fluid in there, I'll leave that for the test drive, and then no matter what, once I verify that it works, I'm gonna drain that all and I'll fill it up with some new Pennzoil synchro mesh. So that's next step, check the transmission. I'll show you where that's at actually. So we are on the passenger side of the transmission. There's my slave. I don't have a drive shaft in yet for the front, but that is your fill bolt. So I'm gonna back that guy out and we'll see if we got fluid. So I just pulled the fill plug. It was in there pretty good. Someone had siliconed it or something, but it came out without breaking, thank God. And oh, it had fluid. It didn't start pouring out when I pulled it, but it was maybe 1/4 of an inch below the fill plug. So I think that's good enough for a test drive just to see if this works. And once I verify the transmission does shift and it, well, once I verify the synchros are okay and it's not grinding, then I'm gonna drain everything with the drain bolt, which is right there, and I'll fill it back up with the synchro mesh. Now let's check that front drive shaft. So here's something that I think a lot of you guys would be interested in seeing. I'm stuck on a rock. The front drive shaft, since I chose to go with an external slave, which is, there's that right there and there's the actual slave, it's on the same side, it's passenger drop, because the later models that this tranny came off of, the pumpkin for the diff was on the other side, driver's. Whereas on the square bodies, the pumpkin is on the passenger. So you're probably better off just getting a later model NV3500 and swapping in an internal slave. I just hate those units. They always seem to fail and bleed internally, and then you got to take the transmission off just to deal with it. Now, the downsides to this, obviously, if I end up hitting my drive shaft off of my slave and break that, then, well, then I'm just done. It doesn't matter if it failed internally. That's, you know, that's cracked and it's done. I got to pull the transmission off anyways. So the idea here, just what I wanted to show you, we're kind of hooked up on the front. I don't have the bolts in, and the rear is basically attached as well back there. But my little exhaust tube thing got in the way, which this is another reason why I wanted to use these little flexible bendable guys, because I need to rebend that and drop it down lower to give myself some more room here. so that can pass through. But basically, I mean, if I put my hand next to it, I do have kind of large hands, but there's a good amount of room in there. I'd say that's probably 4.5, 5 inches. Now we are up on a lift right now, so the tires are not on the ground. I don't know how much that's gonna compress. I think these leaf springs are pretty darn stiff, but when I put it on the ground, I'm gonna have to reassess, reevaluate, and then I'm going to lift this thing all the way up. I may, see if I can show you. Well, the bump stop right there. This one, it's actually a lot smaller than the one on a stock Blazer, so I might swap it out with the stock Blazer. I just gotta see how this looks when I completely compress the suspension and then wiggle on it a little bit with my body. I wanna see if I come anywhere near close to hitting that slave. And if I do, and I am lifted, this truck is lifted, I do not know how much it was lifted when I got it. I think it was either 4 or 6-ish inches. I've got to see about that. I don't plan on doing any hard wheeling or rock crawling, more of like an overland build. That's why I swapped in the 5-speed instead of the 3-speed, so I could get better gas mileage, have those 2 higher gears, got AC in the truck now, a bunch of that kind of stuff. So I shouldn't be flexing it out too much, but I obviously don't want my limiting factor on flex to be this guy, because this is, I think, an aluminum deal, so that should smush pretty easily. Now in theory, if it gets smushed, it shouldn't really kill me if it gets a little smushed or cracked, because all it is a housing for the clutch fork on the back side of the slave here. So I'm nowhere near hitting my slave. You can see I have plenty of room in between the slave and the drive shaft, but more the back side of this. I want to make sure I don't hit that when I'm completely flexed, but I'll let you know what it looks like when I set it down. That's going to be after I actually test the transmission though, because I'm not going to actually put in this front drive shaft until I make sure the transmission works. But that's something I thought that was interesting.